All right. Afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for taking time out of your busy lunch schedule. I know you guys had to choose between food and this talk. I guess, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if that was much of a choice. I'm actually surprised as many people showed up as they have. So my name is Daniel Vacanti. We're going to be talking about hurricanes here for the next 40 minutes or so. How many people actually attended my talk yesterday? Wow, excellent. For those of you who didn't, shame on you. I do have, I guess I'll just, to get started, I do have just a little bit of review, so I make sure that we're all kind of on the same page before we get going. Remember we talked about how our measure of predictability is going to be our answer to the question, when will it be done? Remember there are two forms to the question, when will it be done? There's when will it be done for single items and when will it be done for multiple items. Yesterday we talked about when will it be done for single items. Today we're going to be talking about when will it be done for multiple items. And I said to answer both of those questions, you have to track start date and end date for all items that are flowing through your process. You have to track start date and end date. That's the data that you're going to use to answer when will it be done. I've got another kind of interesting, the reason that we track this type of data and not stuff like story points is because, as I mentioned before, your customers do not know what a story point is. They have no clue what a story point is. And I've got actually one of my very, 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 very favorite videos to kind of explain this concept. So I'm hoping the sound works. I'm hoping everything goes okay. But this is what it's like. Imagine this is an example of a customer asking when will it be done and getting an answer of 12 story points or something like that. Right? And the most dangerous words in the English language, by the way, are watch this.
Going to give me a hand here, getting something to eat, and something simple like a chip butty or maybe a Jimmy Dodger and then a pint of, I don't know, McCune's Lager or Caledonian 80.
I'm not aware of any meetings about thing without Mahatma Johnny Georgia and Johnny Chip Bati.
Oh, for sakes. See me, right? I want a Jimmy Dodger like a sandwich and a chip butty, that's just bread with chips. I'm not even going to get into the pints, just get me that.
Sorry, I don't understand. I need to get some pajamas.
Look you f***ing cow. I need a sandwich, a Jimmy Dodger, it's just bread and jam. Chip butty, Hughes Lager, can you just do that, please, you f***ing cow?
No need for profanity.
Fuck's sake, Apple Scotland, having a wee bit of trouble.
Yeah, if you don't like yourself very much, march into your CFO's office and try to explain what a story point is sometime, because that's what they feel like when they get that answer. So I mentioned yesterday that the real title of today's talk is what does a 19th century Yorkshire cotton industrialist have to do with the Manhattan Project? Did anybody go and look this up? Anybody have an answer for me? No? All right. Well, to answer that question, I'm going to have to make you a deal. Has anyone, well, I'll ask this anyway. Has anyone seen the American game show Let's Make a Deal? Has anyone heard of that game show, Let's Make a Deal? A couple people. You might not know this, but all great American TV shows, all great American game shows are actually hosted by Canadians. It's a weird thing. Monty Hall is this guy who was the host of Let's Make a Deal. It was this ridiculous game show that was started, I think, in the 60s in America, ran through the 70s and 80s, and has just been revived. We've just brought it back, because our game shows don't die in America. They just keep coming back. But Monty Hall was the guy who ran this show. And what he would do is he would choose contestants at random from the audience to play these games. He would have pre-designed games for these contestants. And so contestants would show up, and they'd show up in ridiculous costumes like this, so that Monty Hall would select them. He'd randomly select audience members. One of the games, I want to talk through one of the games. One of the games that he would play is a very, very simple game where he would select an audience member, and then he would show them the stage. And on the stage, there would be three closed doors. Okay? By the way, some of you might be familiar with this problem. If you are familiar with the problem, don't tell anybody. Don't tell your neighbor, right? So anyway, he'd show the contestant 3 closed doors. And the object of the game was very, 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 very simple. Behind one of those closed doors was a new car. And the game, the way you played the game was the contestant just had to choose which one of those 3 doors was the new car. Right? Now, behind the other 2 doors was a goat. So, and actually, we're going to play this game together as a group. As a matter of fact, we're not going to listen to any more YouTube. We're going to play. Let's make a deal. So this is what the stage would look like. 3 closed doors, and we have to choose which door the new car is behind. So what do you guys think? Which door is the new car behind? Number 2. So all right. So I hear number 2. Number 2 was the first one I heard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select number 2. And what Monty Hall would do when the contestant selected number 2, Monty Hall would actually open one of the other 2 doors. So he'll open either 1 or 3, revealing a goat. Right. So here I'll show you. So we're going to select number 2. And you're going to see one of these other doors is going to open. So number 3 is opened, and there's the goat. Right? So now Monty Hall would go back to the contestant and would say, okay, now that I've revealed door number 3 has the goat, here's the deal. Here's the let's make a deal part is, I'm going to let you either stick with your original choice of number 2, or I'm going to give you the option now to change your choice to number 1 if you want to. So what do you guys think? And again, if you know the answer, don't tell anybody. But what do you guys think? What do you think is the best strategy here? Should you change to the 1? The fact that we've got new information about the goat, should that make us change to the 1? Or do you guys think that this is just some big distraction, some kind of sleight of hand type of thing to get Monty Hall off of our original guess of number 2? So what do you guys think? So what's the best strategy in this situation? Stick to the first option, good? You'd probably switch? What do you guys think? So let's just take a quick poll, right? How many people would stick with their original option, number 2? That's interesting, about half the room. How many people would switch to the... All right, so 50-50, interesting. So we've covered pretty much all our options, okay? I want you guys to take a mental note of what your answer was. This is how I'm going to make you guys stay until the end of the presentation, because I'm waiting till the end of the presentation to actually give you the answer to this thing. But just take a mental note of what you think of what your answer was. There's 2 reasons why I like to show this. I like to start off this talk with this example. The first reason is because essentially what Monty Hall is asking us to do is asking us to make a forecast. That's what he's like, forecast where that car is going to be. But the second thing is when we start talking about forecasts and the approaches that we have to take and things like that, the answer that we need, or the way that we come up with our answer, a lot of times is fairly unintuitive. It's unintuitive. I would say it's actually unintuitive to the point of being counterintuitive a lot of times. So we'll come back to Monty Hall and let's make a deal here in just a second. So back to our regularly scheduled program. Because we're talking about making forecasts, I know it is a bit cliched, but probably the forecasting that everybody in this room is really, really familiar with is weather forecasting. So I want to talk a little bit about weather forecasting. Now, I am from South Florida. Well, I shouldn't say I'm from South Florida. I live in South Florida right now. I've lived in South Florida for the past 3 years or so. And if you know anything about South Florida, from time to time they get hit by hurricanes. So I want to talk specifically about hurricane forecasting. So the Earth's geography is kind of interesting. You guys probably know this. The area in the South Atlantic between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer is really known for its storm activity. Now, at certain parts of the year, usually over the late summer and early autumn, storms that form here in this part of the Atlantic actually track to the west and to the north because of the prevailing winds on this part of the Earth. They actually track to the west and to the north. Now, as they track west and north, they actually usually grow in strength and they become what are known as hurricanes. Unfortunately, this is really, really, really bad for the United States because if we look to the west and the north of this area right here, what do you guys see? You see the east coast of the United States, right? So the United States has actually a very vested interest in tracking these storms as early as possible and trying to forecast, are these things going to track and going to grow in strength and become hurricanes and hit us? You guys probably got inundated by all the reports of hurricanes that were going on this year. It was, yeah, well, we'll save the commentary on how the press reports hurricanes for later. If anybody wants to talk about that, we certainly can. Now, this year, I actually experienced my first real live hurricane. It was very, very, very exciting, right? And the thing is, the hurricanes that hit us, the hurricanes that hit the U.S. anyway, really weren't as bad as was reported. This is actually a picture of my backyard after the hurricane went through, and it kind of looks bad. You know, we had several down trees and a down fence and everything. But to be honest with you, the hurricane itself wasn't that bad. The other thing was that there was almost, due to the hurricane itself, there was almost no loss of life at all in America. And I think we got hit by 3 major hurricanes this year. Almost none. So I don't want to talk about this hurricane specifically. I want to talk about a different one that hit about 5 years ago on October 22nd, 2012. There was a storm that formed in the southern Caribbean. And this particular storm, when it forms, we have in America something known as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, N-O-A-A, that puts out these types of forecasts. Has anyone ever seen a picture like this before? Have you guys seen something like this before? So whenever a storm forms, NOAA will go out and they will put forth one of these pictures. Now, this was very, very early on in the storm's development. You can see there wasn't even a name for it. It was just, at this point, it's just called Tropical Depression 18. It formed in the southern Atlantic, and it was essentially a glamorized low pressure system at this time. It wasn't really anything to speak of. This particular storm actually grew to become the largest hurricane ever recorded in the North Atlantic, as measured by diameter anyway. It was the largest hurricane ever recorded in the North Atlantic. Does anybody know? Anybody remember the name of this? You might have to be from the States to remember this, or even Canada, if we have any Canadian friends. Anybody remember the name of this? It wasn't Katrina. Did somebody say it? I think Sandy. It was actually Hurricane Sandy, right? Hurricane Sandy, the largest gonna ever. We're gonna spend a lot of time talking about Hurricane Sandy today. As I mentioned before, it's the largest hurricane ever. It was the second costliest in terms of property damage ever, second only to Katrina, as a matter of fact. But it affected 24 states. Including, and actually even including some of Canada, 24 states. Usually when hurricanes hit, they affect 1, 2, 3 states. This one affected 24. This storm was so big, it hit 24 states over America. Would you have predicted any of that just by looking at this picture right here? I'm hoping your answer is no. I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking. I certainly wouldn't have. Another thing about Sandy, and this is the same thing as I was mentioning before, another thing about Sandy is there was surprisingly little loss of life. Now, obviously, due to the hurricane itself, now obviously all loss of life is tragic, but I think there were only 11 deaths specifically attributed to Sandy, to the storm itself. Only 11, even though this was the largest storm in history, only 11 people died. What that tells me anyway is NOAA knows a thing or two about forecasting, right? They were able to give people enough notice to take enough action in order to get out of the storm's path. So the question is, what do they know that we don't? So what exactly is going on in this picture? When you guys look at this picture, what's the first thing that kind of jumps out at you? What's the very first thing? Like what Jamaica. in terms of the visualization, what's your eye drawn to? Yeah, this white cone thingy, right? This white cone thingy. Does anybody happen to know what this white cone thingy represents? Anybody know? Anybody looked at these pictures and know what that white cone is actually? Anyone? Is it too soon after lunch? You guys in a food coma or something like that? So I heard probable path. That's actually the probable path is actually right. So. You guys might not have noticed, there's this black box with some white text at the top of this. I'm going to blow it up to you for you guys so you can see. This black text says, the cone contains the probable path of the storm center, but does not show the size of the storm. Hazardous conditions can occur outside of the storm. So what this cone is showing us is the probable path of just the storm center. That storm center can go anywhere, from up this side to up this side. And as you guys know, hurricanes are pretty big. So you can have storm conditions, well outside here. All they're predicting is the center of that storm. Now, when they say probable path, what do you guys think that they mean by probable path? Silence. Do you think they mean that this is exactly the path that the storm is going to take? Best guess? Best guess based on a percentile? Does anybody happen to know what those percentiles are? 85? Good question, actually. If you go and read on NOAA's website, they actually say it's actually a 60 to 70% chance that the center of the storm is going to be within that cone. 60 to 70% chance. Right? Why not 100%? Why can't these guys give us 100%? These are professional weather forecasters. That's what we pay them for. That's what they spend their whole life doing. Why only 60 to 70%? Why not 100%? Yeah. Then the picture would be all white. Exactly right. The cone would essentially be Earth, right? If they wanted to give us 100%, that cone would essentially be Earth, which brings us to a point. This is a point that I was trying to make for you guys yesterday. Weather forecasting is uncertain, as you guys probably know. Therefore, you can't think deterministically. You need to think probabilistically. What are some of the things that go into making weather forecasting uncertain? What are some things that can affect that path? Why they say probable path? What are some things? Do you guys know?
Don't have all the data, don't have the models or the computing power.
Don't have all the data, don't have computing power. What else? What else about forecasting? What could happen to the storm as it moves? Change course. It could change. Winds could change. Sea temperature could change. Other storms could be coming through the area. All of those things could affect the probable path of the storm. That's why you actually need to think probabilistically. And if you guys remember from yesterday, I said that thinking probabilistically means acknowledging that there is more than one possible outcome. And that's exactly what NOAA is showing us. There is more than one possible future outcome of the path of this storm. They actually run several models. In order to come up with that cone, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but they actually run several models, dozens or even hundreds of models to try and figure out the path of the storm. And this is one such graphic that shows all the models that they ran. Different models giving, as you can see, different projected paths. Okay, this is yet something else. I don't know if you guys have ever looked too deeply into hurricane forecasting, but this is another one where you can see that each model actually gives a different projected path, and NOAA now has to take all these models and put it together into a forecast. So that's the first thing that we need to acknowledge that NOAA understands is they're really just making a probabilistic prediction. They're not telling us that with 100% certainty where it's going to go. They're saying 60 to 70% chance it's going to fall within this range of a path. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is, do you think that this was the only forecast that NOAA made? Do you think that they put this out there like, hey, this storm formed on October 22nd, here's your forecast, I'm done. Do you think? I just broke my clicker. Do you think that's what they did? What do they do? They update the forecast? Does anybody happen to know how often they update that forecast? Right after they make the first one? Early on in the storm, they actually update their forecast. I think it is every 12 hours. If the storm is growing in size and intensity, and if it looks like it's going to cause major damage, they start updating the forecast more frequently. It goes, I think, from 12 to 8 to 5 to 3, and then I think to 1. They're actually making forecasts every so often. So this forecast was made on 11 a.m. on October 22nd. 24 hours later, they updated their forecast, and this is what the forecasts now look at 11 a.m. on Tuesday. Can you imagine if NOAA stopped here? If they said, okay, this is our forecast, we've made our estimate of this projected path, this is our forecast, and they just stopped. I don't know if you remember I said those 24 states, especially New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. If you lived in New York and you saw this picture, how nervous would you be? probably not too nervous, right? Because it looks like, not only does it look like it's going to weaken to a storm, by the way, that's what these S's mean. It's going to weaken to a storm fairly quickly, and then it looks like it's just going to head off out into the Atlantic, right? I'm probably not that worried. So if this was the only forecast that NOAA made, I'm like, okay, I'm good. A week later, this is what Sandy looked like. This was that storm. Think about that for a second. So NOAA updates their forecasts constantly as they get new information. They're constantly going out and they're getting new information about these hurricanes, and they're updating their forecasts. I think this. I'm hoping the next slide is one of my favorite graphics of this. You can see it's a time-lapse JPEG of all the forecasts that NOAA put out, and you can see how they're constantly updating it. They're getting new information about the storm, and they're constantly updating, and that's what allowed them to actually adjust course on the path of the storm. And you can see people in New York were given plenty of notice about it. So there's one other thing that's happening in this picture that I wanted to talk about. One other thing. You guys never thought there was so much going on in one of these forecast pictures, right? There's one other thing. I'll try and let me ask you guys. We talked about how it's a probabilistic range. How we talked about how this gets updated as they get new information. What else kind of strikes you about this picture? Yeah, go ahead. Yes, the uncertainty is bigger. It's a wider uncertainty the further into the future that we go. But specifically along those lines, how far out in the future are they going? Yeah, just 3 or 4 days. Why aren't they predicting 2 weeks? Remember I said a week later the storm looked like that. Why aren't they predicting a week out? Why aren't they predicting 2 weeks out? Why aren't they predicting 6 months or a year out, if this sounds familiar to anybody? What's that, sorry? You can't, yeah, because again, if they were to try and forecast the probable path for the next year, that cone would be Earth. So that's the kind of the third thing is NOAA only puts out really kind of short-term forecasts. One, because the uncertainty grows so much as the further out you get in the future. But then two, we know we're going to update it anyway. We're going to update that information anyway. So why put out an extremely long-term forecast? So all of this is rolling up into some basic principles of forecasting. How am I doing on time? Okay. Some basic principles of forecasting. You need to think probabilistically and not deterministically. Hopefully beat that dead horse. You need to update your forecast as you get more information. By the way, this is this continuous forecasting hashtag. I'm trying to get it to trend on Twitter. I can't. But if you guys want to help me out, that would be great. But that's this idea of continuous forecasting. For a long time in software, we've known the benefit of continuous stuff, right? Continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous whatever, right? Forecasting is exactly the same way. Small batch forecasting is much better than big batch forecasting. And then, of course, shorter term forecasts are better than longer ones. So these are just some basic principles of forecasting. So now your question is probably like, Dan, this is all great, but I get it. It's all about you guys. It's all about you. I get that. So we need to figure out how we're going to apply this to how you guys work right now. So the principle number one, think probabilistically and not deterministically. So what do we need to think probabilistically about? What's the forecast that we are asked every single day? When will it be done, right? That's the forecast. So we need to think probabilistically about when will it be done. What does it even mean to think probabilistically? Okay, and I mentioned this before. Thinking probabilistically means acknowledging there's more than one possible outcome. So let me give you a typical example here. Okay, so let's say that we've started a project and we've completed 12 stories in 1 week. We have 120 stories left to complete in our backlog. When will this project be finished? Traditionally, how would we answer this question? You guys know, yeah, right? 10 weeks. 10 weeks. What did you do? I mean, you guys took the fact that we have 120 stories in our backlog. We have 12 stories done in 1 week. 120 divided by 12 is 10. So we would give an answer of 10 weeks, right? I'm jet lagged. Is that right? Is that what we said? 10 weeks. What's wrong with the answer 10 weeks? According to what I just told you, what's wrong with the answer 10 weeks? It's deterministic. It's a deterministic answer. We're saying for sure this thing is going to happen in 10 weeks. It's going to get done in 10 weeks. What is that answer missing? The probability of outcomes. It's missing the range of the possible outcomes and the probabilities associated with that range, right? When your customer hears 10 weeks, what do you think your customer is thinking? Yeah, 100%. That 100%, this thing is going to be done in 10 weeks, right? There are actually two problems with using that average to answer the question, when will it be done? There's really many, many more than two problems with using an average to answer when will it be done. And this is, I'm going to give you guys more homework. I think I gave you guys homework last time. You guys are going to stop coming to my talks because I keep giving you guys homework, I know. You have to read this book. If there's one book that you read about this stuff, it's called The Flaw of Averages. This is the book that you need to read. And the basic premise of The Flaw of Averages is that plans based on average fail on average. Right? That's the basic premise of the book. So if you communicate a forecast, a deterministic forecast in terms of an average, you have pretty close to a 50% chance of being wrong. You have a 50% chance of being right, but you have a 50% chance of being wrong. So plans based on average fail on average. So the two problems associated with communicating in terms of an average is, one, it's deterministic, it's interpreted as deterministic, and two, you have pretty much a 50% chance of being wrong, okay? So if we go back to this, as I mentioned before, your forecast should contain two parts, a range and a probability, which gets us to the original question that I asked you guys. How are we going to come up, if we're going to try and figure out how do we come up with that range and probability, what does the 19th century Yorkshire cotton industrialist have to do with the Manhattan Project? Anybody? Anyone? You guys are just going to start shouting stuff that I want to hear. Forecasting, cycle time, throughput, flow. The answer is yes, Monte Carlo. Duh, right? Monte Carlo. So we're actually going to go from Monty Hall to Monte Carlo. So this is where we come back to our original let's make a deal game. Imagine you knew absolutely nothing about math, which is actually most Americans, but I'm not going to say that out loud. Imagine that you know absolutely nothing about math, you don't have any advanced statistics degrees or anything like that. What is one way that you think you could come up with to try and figure out the best strategy here? Can anybody think creatively? Yeah, do it over and over and over and over again, right? Simulate it over and over and over again and just track the results. Just track the results. Just do that. Right? So let's go back, because that's exactly what this website does. So remember, we selected door number 2. So now we have an opportunity. Do we change our answer or do we keep our answer? What do you guys think? Has anyone changed their opinion in terms of what we should do based on what I just showed you? What do you guys think? Should we change or should we stay? Change? We should definitely update. At the very least, the new information should cause us to have a conversation about, do we need to update our forecast or not? We got new information. That's exactly what happened. We got new information. We should probably update our forecast. So I'm hearing a lot of people say change, so we are going to change. Instead of sticking with door number 2, we're going to go to door number 1, and we are going to win the car by changing. And what this website does, you can see what they've done is they've actually tracked. This website is really just a little Monte Carlo simulation. They've tracked those who have switched and those who didn't switch. And you can see that the switched, hopefully you guys can see this, the switched is the winning strategy 66% of the time, where the didn't switch is the winning strategy about 33% of the time, right? By 2 to 1, switching is a much, much better strategy. But the point here is, even if you knew nothing about math, you could go and you could just run this over and over and over again, just like this website, and you could come up with what the best strategy is. Now, here, it's still only a 66% chance of winning, right? That doesn't mean, just because you switch doesn't mean that you were automatically going to win. There's still a significant chance that you're going to fail. But by 2 to 1, it's a much better strategy to switch. And you can see, we just walked away with a new car, right? This, like I said, this idea of running these experiments over and over and over and over and over again, that's all Monte Carlo is. That's really all Monte Carlo is. Yeah, question?
That site is obviously visited by people who know the answer. Because on that make a deal, the vast majority stuck to the choice.
It's true, probably. I mean, there's probably something. So the observation was that it could be that this site is biased because it's visited by people who stuck to the answer. But I suppose even if you stuck to it, I think it would still come out. I still think the numbers would come out. Excuse me.
The visitors know what the correct answer is, which is to switch. But on the original show, they always stuck with the answer.
Yeah, because I think there's something about human psychology that people would stick to the original answer. But the point here is that that's really all Monte Carlo simulation is, just running these experiments over and over and over again to come up with what our answer should look like. So in real life, just so you guys can see what that looks like is, this is, and I'm not going to go too deep into Monte Carlo, unfortunately, because we don't have that much time. This is a measure of a team's historical throughput. So yesterday I mentioned a cycle time, a metric called cycle time, which is a measure of elapsed time that it takes for individual items to get done. This is a measure of teams' historical throughput. And throughput is how many things, how many items teams are getting done per unit of time. So for example, this team got 12 items completed on August 27th. They got 4 items completed on August 14th. They got 0 items completed on August 9th. This is a representation of team's historical throughput. What we can do is using that data that I mentioned yesterday, start date and end date, we can calculate our team's historical throughput. And we can take this historical data and we can feed it into a Monte Carlo simulation and we can run an experiment over and over and over again to find out what are our chances of our project being done at a certain time. And again, I don't want to go too deep into this. I just kind of want to show you the results if I can get my mouse back. And this is exactly what we've done. What we've simulated here is assume we have 100 items in our backlog using all this historical throughput. We're trying to answer the question, when will those 100 items be done? And you can see we have an 85% chance of this thing being finished, or this project being finished on December 24th. We have a 95% chance of it finishing on December 29th. We have a 50% chance of it being finished on December 15th, right? Histograms, in terms of customer consumption, histograms aren't all that great, which is why it's better to kind of overlay these results on top of a calendar. This is really more of a calendar representation of those results. So what you can say here is, if your customer comes back to you and says, I absolutely have to have all those stories, those 100 stories finished by December 1st, you can say, well, there's a chance of that happening, but there's only about a 1% chance of that happening. Is that a bet that you're willing to make? And if that's not a bet you're willing to make, what are some things that we can do about that? What are some things that we can do about that? What are some things that we can do to make that forecast better? Cut some scope. Yep, reduce instead of 100. Do we really need those 100 items by December 1st? What else can we do? Food coma. Change the date. Yeah, December 1st doesn't work. If you're really looking for more kind of an 85th, 95th percentile, we're probably looking more like at the end of December, early January. Change the date. Those are the 2 best options. What are some other really kind of bad options? Add more people. Yep, add more people. Work overtime, or potentially even some combination, of above. So, yeah, type faster. So that's really the point. Is we need to be able to give our customers that type of information so they can place the right bets. I'm just going to go through this stuff. That was probabilistic stuff. Yeah, we already got that. Okay, so update. Principle number 2: update your forecast when you get more information. We are constantly getting more information. As we're working on our projects, we're constantly getting more and more information, and we should be using that information. How many times at the beginning of a project do you set a plan, and then that's the plan, and it never gets updated? And now the plan becomes more important than the actual outcome, the actual delivery of the value. How many times does that happen? I mean, again, can you imagine if NOAA only put out that one forecast and said, okay, people, you're on your own now. Good luck. Right? We're constantly getting more and more information. We should be building pictures like this. And the way that, this is that continuous forecasting. Continuous forecasting practice is, we have an ability, using our historical throughput, to say, imagine if we go back in time and say, at the beginning of the project, let's say if we stopped our data on August 12th, This is our historical throughput up into August 12th. Well, you can see that now our 85th percentile completion date looks somewhere like January 24th. But as we go through, and it's probably kind of better if I show the histogram, but as we go through and we get more data, more items complete, the team is working on stuff as we get more data, can you guys see, as that more data comes about, we should be updating that forecast. We should be taking that new data into account. Potentially even saying, you know what, this older data is no longer relevant too, because that's too far in the past. That doesn't really look like the future that we're trying to simulate. And we should be constantly be updating that forecast. At the very least, that new information should prompt the conversation about, do we need to update our forecast or not? So this is that idea of continuous forecasting. And the way that, it's really, really easy to build a Monte Carlo simulation. And you can see with the computing power of computers today that adding more information and updating the model happens instantaneously. We're actually running, I didn't mention this, but we're actually running 10,000 simulations here. 10,000 simulations of this project. And you can see we can update that. We can update the forecast immediately. It literally takes seconds. None of this getting everybody in a room for days or weeks to try and come up with what that updated forecast is. Your forecast should be able to be generated literally in seconds. So that's continuous forecasting. This is one of my favorite. This is a company I work with right now, Ultimate Software. They actually do this. And they have a portfolio stand-up. It's essentially their scrum of scrums, even though they don't call it a scrum of scrums, and I'm not sure that they should or would. But this is all of their teams and that get together every day for their portfolio stand-up, and they talk about how are the releases going for each of the teams. And they're running this Monte Carlo simulation in the background. We're updating their data every single day, and they come and they see, you can see that this is their completion likelihood based on the data that we have right now, and they have a simple red, yellow, green dashboard that they've come up with based on the team's chances of completing on time. And the conversations that they have is exactly what I mentioned before. Can we change scope? Can we change the date? God forbid, do we need to add people or work overtime or whatever? But every day, this is the thing that they're looking at in their portfolio stand-up. Okay, so principle number 3: shorter-term forecasts are better than longer-term ones. That's this picture right here. The beauty, the brilliance of Scrum, if I can say this, the brilliance of Scrum was, remember back in the waterfall days, we were trying to plan 12, 18, 24 months out, and we weren't very good at that. And the brilliance of Scrum that came along and said, you know what, instead of looking a year out or 18 months out, let's just talk about what's going to happen for the next 30 days or the next 2 weeks or something like that, because we have a much, much better chance of being able to forecast that than months at a time. Right? We can take that to the next extreme, and this is kind of really where Kanban comes in, is like, well, not only is it better to only look at 30 days or 2 weeks, but we should be looking at this thing continuously. So in general, shorter-term forecasts are better than longer-term ones. I'm not saying that you shouldn't forecast long-term. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying, though, is if you do forecast long-term, you shouldn't be upset or you shouldn't be surprised when that forecast changes or should change. Okay? So, all right, to sum up, if you track nothing else, track the date that an item starts and the date that an item completes for all work items. You can calculate throughput from that start and end data. Use something like Monte Carlo simulation to get your range of possible outcomes. Communicate your forecast in terms of that range and that probability, update your forecast as you get more information, and then when possible, favor short-term forecasts over longer-term ones. Always remember these basic principles of forecasting, as I mentioned before. And most importantly, the best forecasts in the world are meaningless unless you actually take action on the information that you're getting. So, again, shameless plug. The book that actually talks mostly about this side of the forecasting is the When Will It Be Done out there on LeanPub. And then, of course, we have actionable agile metrics for predictability here. And then there's the ultimate, that dashboard that we were looking at before. There's an article called Ultimate Kanban out on InfoQ if you guys want to look at that case study as well. Questions? Please, yes. When you're using, Yeah, so when we're using, so the question is, when you're using a Monte Carlo simulation, what model of a Monte Carlo simulation are you using? In the examples that I showed here, all I was using was a basic throughput forecast. So, and that means the time's up, right? A basic throughput forecast. So we're saying that the future that we're trying to forecast roughly looks like the past that we have throughput for. And we're taking that historical throughput data and just saying, you know what, we're randomly selecting a throughput in the past. So if we got, on August 1st, if we got 10 items done, then for the next day, we're going to assume that we got 10 items. And then for the next day after that, we're going to randomly choose something and say we got that many items done, right, and go forward. It's just it's a very, very, very simple throughput forecasting. But that was just for what I showed here. I mean, you guys can use whatever type of forecasting model you want to. So does that mean that we actually are officially out of time? Yes. Are we at 1 o'clock? Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, thank you guys very much. I appreciate you taking time out of lunch. Hopefully, you didn't miss too much food. If you guys have any other questions, I'm happy to stay around and answer some of those. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks for showing up on a Friday. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much.